Liz.
Second, and just to fully disclose what we're doing is we're doing the budget workshop, the annual budget workshop for the city of Duarte. We're starting at 4:17 right now. Okay, that's very good. So we did the adoptions. We're still waiting for Brian Urias. And then what is this with Margaret? Margaret is on the call.
Yes.
Okay, you can see her, right, Kristen?
It's not letting me elevate her. Yes, I can see her.
Okay, very good.
She says she's muted the whole time.
Here I am.
Oh, I hear Brock.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yep,
Yeah.
Perfect.
Hello, Margaret.
Great, and then I see Brian on the call too. Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah, we've got the whole team here. Awesome. Okay, so we are.
Can you guys hear me?
Who got dropped? Who got dropped?
Tamara did a mic drop.
Can you guys hear me? This is Brian.
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, here I am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. We're actually on number 2. Well, we'll just finish number 2, the adoptions of the agenda. We're going to move on to number 3 now, the public input. Is that you, Dr. Jordan, or Kristen, whoever wants to lead on this?
Yes, let me go ahead. This is Kristen. I just wanted to kind of share that what our plan was is that if there are people, attendees, just like when we have our budget workshop, if you would like to go ahead and ask a question now, make a comment now, you are welcome to do that. We need you to click raise your hand. However, if you would like to reserve the opportunity to ask questions or make comments after we give the presentation, we have traditionally done that as well. So don't feel like you have to now if you would rather later. And frankly, if you just want to listen, you're welcome to do that also. So do we have anybody right now? So it looks right now like we don't have anybody who has their hand up to say anything during this time. But like I said, we will definitely be keeping track of this and give that opportunity later in the presentation.
And
Kristen?
Yes.
If I need to ask a question, then I'll kind of wait for a break in what you're explaining, and then I'll say, can I take a question?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
That works just fine. I think we're going to try to treat it very much like the budget workshop, which a lot of times you are kind of holding on to your questions if possible, more towards the end, but we'll try to take a couple different breaks just to make sure that we don't go too far along without giving that opportunity for your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just for clarification, really quick, Kristen, will we be able to go ahead and see the, oh, hi, hello. We have a new member here. Hi.
Nice participant.
John, I can't hear you because you're in mute.
Yeah, he's the real council member behind the council member.
Awesome.
All right.
He's the one who's bankrolling. Okay, so Kristen, just for clarification, will we be able to go ahead and see the members that would like to speak? Would they be on this Zoom?
Yes, actually we do. We have Victoria actually managing all the attendees. And so to the extent that an attendee would like to ask a question, we ask that they go ahead and raise their hand. So for example, Cheryl Leffman just raised her hand and does have a question. And so, so I am gonna, you are now unmuted, Cheryl. And so if you have something that you would like to share during public input, go right ahead.
Cheryl, you have the floor.
Wait, let me try it again.
Cheryl, you actually dropped the mic, y'all.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All righty.
Yes.
So, hi everybody. It's interesting doing it this way, but I'm all about it. been working on this platform for a while now.
I can't see you, Cheryl. Can you show us your face? I don't want to see the Chamber of Commerce.
I don't know that I have the ability. It doesn't.
Yes, you do. You did before.
Yeah, no, I don't believe our attendees are actually.
No? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Just kidding then. All right.
Good. So I can turn off the spotlight. Okay, good. A little bit of a halo glow there. But wanted to just let the council know, if they have not read their emails from last week. Last week we were unfortunately had to reduce our staff sizing, and we had to let go of Diana after 20 years at the chamber. And it was not an easy thing to do, but it was definitely something that we needed to do to ensure that we were financially stable and responsible with the funding that we do have. And we are currently operating with just me full-time. We did post a part-time position that'll be at a very low pay in order to be able to try to get administrative help. That's going to be the biggest challenge that we're facing right now. So I wanted to let the council know that the chamber does not want this in any way, shape, or form to affect our operations. To the best extent that we can, we're trying to keep things as stable as possible. So with that, I want to thank you all for your past support of the chamber. As you know, we have been assisting people, businesses, and the community at no charge to those people that are not members. Of course, our members do get a little bit of extra promotion that non-members do not, but we thank the city so much for the Duarte Stronger Together banners. That whole signage program has been a boost, and matter of fact, I just picked up 5 more for some orders that we have. So it means a lot to the businesses, and I want to thank the city for their continued support in our businesses. It does truly mean the world to them. So that was it. I wanted to again thank you very much for your past support and ask for continued support in this fiscal year.
And Cheryl, if I may say something, these banners that you guys have been making, they're so effective. I tell you, I was about to go ahead and cancel my what do you call that? Not Anytime Fitness membership, because I was like, I haven't been using it for 4 years. Oh, not 4 years, for 4 or 5 months. And then that sign showed me that, hey, you're open for business. Then I actually stopped thinking. I said, you know what? I'm not going to go ahead and cancel. I'm going to start working out tonight too.
Well,
so
thank you.
they're
Thank
very
you.
effective. Yeah.
Actually, they it's funny you would have mentioned Anytime Fitness, because even though they were closed, they actually made me cry when I opened up the envelope. They not only sent a check in for their membership, they also paid for next year's membership, because they felt that much value in the chamber and they want to make sure that we succeed. So those types of things are invaluable. Like I said, you have no idea that sign means the world to them. So thank you guys again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we don't currently have any other attendees asking to ask any questions, but like I said, if later after our presentation you do have questions, feel free to raise your hand, and when we open that up, we will invite you to speak. Or if you prefer not to speak, you can actually send in your comments and Victoria can read them on your behalf. So at that point, I think that is all the public input we have at this time, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move on to number 4, budget overview of the fiscal year 2020-2021. And we're going to have the Dr. Jordan. You're going to go ahead and make some remarks. I can't see your head.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Let's see if I can share my screen. Kristen, I'm just going to go right into this. Are we good?
We're good to go. Go for it.
All right. Well, thank you to everybody who's here for our budget workshop presentation. This is my first. It's very, very exciting to be here. I've never seen how it works normally, so this, to me, this is how it always is. I'm just going to make a few remarks that are going to lead into, did somebody say, did I hear something? No? That are going to lead into Kristen's talk. Very high level overview about some of the fiscal issues that we're facing, our guiding philosophy, and where we think we need to be going in the upcoming year and in the years beyond. So let's get this going. My topics will be the guiding philosophy behind the budget for 2021, our current budgetary context, and then looking ahead the coming budget year and beyond. Way back in March, which seems like a different world, which in fact it was, we came to you during the mid-year budget report and said, we're looking for some guidance on our guiding philosophy for the upcoming budget. Would it be sort of a status quo, maintaining existing levels of services, a kind of a wait and see approach, in particular with the anticipated new revenue from Measure D, which, as everybody recalls, went into effect July 1st, increasing the local sales tax by 0.75 cents. We also said, would it be a year for program enhancements and service enhancements? Or were we looking at a year perhaps of revenue enhancements and potential cost reductions? Well, since that time, boy, did everything change. COVID-19 and all within, again, that period starting at the beginning of March to now. And we settled, given where we were sort of out in the world and in conversations with you council members, on focusing the budget really on two of those guiding philosophies. In some sense, it's a status quo budget, maintaining existing service levels in key program areas, and truly taking a wait and see approach for what's going to happen during 2021, because we, and really frankly, nobody knows where the world is going the next few months, what that means for our economy, what it means for our local revenue sources. However, we do know that given the impacts that we've already seen, we did make some cost reductions and we built those into this budget. We moved some activities outside of the general fund. We've had some targeted reductions in staffing and some deferred capital, certain capital projects. Kristen in her presentation will get into the details of those more, and I'm just sort of highlighting them now. Now, with those two overarching philosophies in place, I want to talk a little bit about where we find ourselves. What is, as I'm calling it, the current context for the budget. And it really is one of fiscal crosscurrents, where you have sort of conflicting currents, if you will, pushing in different directions. On the one hand, we are projecting deficits, and I'll talk a little bit about that. On the upside, Measure D and other local revenues. Looking back a little bit, where we find ourselves in the level of structural balance, i.e., are we making ends meet on an ongoing basis this year, and how that stands in relation to past years, and finally our current level of city reserves. What's the bottom line? We are projecting deficits. In the current year, I say current in quotes because it just ended. The fiscal year ended June 30, fiscal year 2020. We see ourselves ending the year with about a $1.1 million deficit by which expenditures are going to exceed revenues. We are projecting for the upcoming year a larger deficit of about $1.7 million in fiscal year 2021. We will be using our reserves under the proposed budget to cover those shortfalls. Now, why is that happening? What is the major reason for the budget shortfalls? Well, like everybody knows, there's been a lot of economic impact the last few months. And for the city of Duarte, for us, that has a real impact on our sales tax revenue because we are heavily dependent on sales tax here. Looking at this chart, if you look back in fiscal year 18-19, our total sales tax collections were about $5.8 million, a little over that. We're projecting for the current year, the year just ended, about $1 million below that, about $4.87 million. And again, that's largely from the projected loss in economic activity and related taxable sales for this final quarter of fiscal year 1920, excuse me. And then looking ahead to the next fiscal year, we're still seeing lower levels of sales tax than we otherwise would, and that's having an impact on what we call it our base sales tax now, and then the new 3/4 cents transaction tax under Measure D. That was originally forecasted to bring in about $2.7 million, and we're looking at about 2.1 for Measure D now. That's our best estimate. Again, I don't want to say these numbers like we have a perfect crystal ball looking out ahead, because we don't. Nobody does. But those are our best estimates right now. That said, it really is worth noting what an incredible year the city has had in the current year, fiscal year 1920, with what I call our development-related revenues. Revenues from building permits and plan check fees in the current year are going to be about $3.6 million, which is really historic. I doubt we've had any year anywhere close to that. And there's so much development going on in the city. The city council and staff in past years has worked really, really hard and effectively at economic development. And one element of that economic development, besides just having so much more opportunities for the people who live and work in the city, is that city revenues go up. And you're seeing these one-time revenues from projects at the City of Hope, Duarte Station, and those revenues for the city came in this year. Now, they are one-time. They're going back down next fiscal year. But nevertheless, they've really helped out in the current situation immeasurably. That said, you know, the proposed 2021 budget is as I mentioned, we are facing a deficit, and really for the past 7 years, the city has been facing really a structural budget imbalance. And as you can see in this chart, there were 2 of the past 7 years, fiscal year 17-18 and 18-19, where the city did run general fund surpluses. Not large ones, but they were surpluses. However, even those 2 years, again, from the city's past with economic development, it was a couple of one-time items, land sales in particular, 1.9 million land sale in 17-18, and then 18-19, 2.1. That is what caused you, council, to declare a fiscal emergency and place Measure D on the ballot, which from the city's fiscal perspective, thankfully passed, and is going to be giving us a lot of time to restructure in the way that we need to make the budget balance going forward. Now, the good news is that due to really good fiscal management over several decades, really, you've gone into this period of fiscal imbalances with a good level of reserves, of money set aside for a rainy day or for emergencies. And you can see at the end of the next fiscal year 2021, we are projecting city having roughly $8.3 to $8.4 million in reserve, which is about 41% of our annual general fund expenditures, which is a solid reserve level that's recommended by all the best practice manuals on these things. We're even getting, again, this fiscal year, the benefit of past economic development policies, in particular, the last year of a loan payoff from the former redevelopment agency to the city is going to add to our cash about $3.3 million. That's just an outstanding loan. It doesn't count as revenue, but it does help our discretionary reserves and our cash flow. But again, this is a final payment for that. So this isn't going on in future years, so we can't depend on it. Looking ahead, the current budget year and beyond, I want to focus on three things: our economic uncertainty, the cost pressures that we, frankly, in all cities are facing, and the need for some long-range financial planning. This is a fascinating chart to me. This was the Congressional Budget Office's forecast for the unemployment rate. They did their annual forecast in January of 2020, and they were forecasting U.S. unemployment at about 3.5% to 4% over the next 6 to 7 years. They revised their projection of unemployment and the unemployment rate in July, and as you can see, it just skyrocketed. It made all the difference in the world. What's important there, however, is that there's a growing consensus among economists that economic activity to some degree is going to be diminished in the United States for several years relative to how it was going to be. Some people have called it the 90% economy. What that means for us here in Duarte is that probably our city revenues, whatever they were going to be and whatever trajectory they were on prior to COVID-19, they're probably going to be a little bit less now, and perhaps for several years. Nobody knows for sure, but that's where consensus seems to be brewing. Now, that's the uncertainty part. What we do now for certain is that our costs for law enforcement in one case, and then several non-salary personnel costs, I sometimes call these the hidden costs, for pensions and health insurance. Those are just going up. They're going up for the city of Duarte. They're going up for every city in the state of California, frankly, for every city in the country. It's not just our problem, but it is a situation here that we are going to have to manage both in the coming year and in the many years to come. I have a chart here. This is currently our best projection of the city's pension costs over the next 5 to 6 years. And a lot is going to depend on, our pension is managed by CalPERS, California Public Employee Retirement System. So much is going to depend on their investment returns, their discount rate assumptions, a whole bunch of actuarial items. But we can be certain, this is already sort of baked into our fiscal cake, that our pension costs between now and 25, 26, next 5 years, are going to go up anywhere from about 50% to maybe even doubling, depending on what investment returns happen and what other assumptions do or do not come true.
Did you say 50%?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Did you say 50%? The change?
From anywhere from 50% to doubling to 100%, yes. And a couple of things I want to emphasize. One is there is still some uncertainty there. A lot will depend on investment returns and discount rate assumptions, all kinds of things. The other thing is that this is not unique to Duarte. If other cities, counties, if they're making charts, they look like this. This is just a situation that we're going to have to manage and that we have to plan through, which we absolutely can. And the kind of economic development that we've done, the Measure D that we've put in place, it gives us the tools to manage it. It's just going to be work. And this is where I want to end and head into Kristen's talk. What all that means is that this year, it's really kind of a starting point for us. We will be coming back to you, council, and to the community with a great deal of formal long-range financial planning and forecasting. We're going to build that into our annual budget process and make an integrated long-term financial plan part of what you see every year, that does two things. I mean, obviously, nobody has a crystal ball. We can't see for sure what's going to happen in the future, but there are certainly things that we can anticipate. And in anticipating them, that helps you shape your fiscal future. You're not just sort of hanging on year to year. This is how you look at what could happen and make the kind of changes now or early that can put you in a strong position to keep providing the kinds of services that the community wants now and in the future. That's what our goal is. That's what we're going to be doing, and we pledge to come back to you and the community with. That's all I have to say. I would be happy to take any questions you have.
If there aren't questions directly for Dan at this point, or if you think of something afterwards, I won't be offended if you ask the question later. But I can roll right into my part of the presentation, unless anyone has any immediate need to stop now. Sounds like we're good. Okay, so I am going to share my screen, see how successful I am. Nope, it looks like I'm gonna have to kick you out, Dan.
With pleasure.
Second the motion.
Okay, let's try it again.
People,
So funny. Okay, now can we see that okay? All right.
we can.
Terrific. Okay, well, so my goal is to drill down a little into a little bit more detail than what Dan had just spoken to. So bear with me. I am going to, again, just kind of talk a little bit from the staff perspective. As mentioned, we really started drafting this in late March. And, you know, all of our initial estimates indicated, even when we were with the Finance Ad Hoc Committee, that we would have an operating budget deficit, but that we would have some time in order to address this, because in the event that Measure D had passed, it would give us an even better cushion. But eventually we had to, you know that we were going to have to do something structurally. Then in April and May, we were working on already looking at expenditure reductions to try to come closer in line with what our structural revenues were. We were refining our revenue estimates, and then COVID-19, we're starting to kind of make some guesses on what was going to happen with the revenues and, frankly, the expenditures, which we'll talk about also. Basically, in June, we have seen the economy begin to reopen. We were talking earlier about, fitness centers reopening and our restaurants, reopening, closing, reopening. But really from the city's facilities perspective, only a portion of our facilities have been able to reopen. And so it has been this information helps us, but I even struggle to call it a projection. It still feels very much to me like a guesstimate as to what the near-term impact is going to be versus a long-term. It's really still unclear what the new normal is, particularly in the long term, and Dan touched on that. I think it's ironic because I think we used the word new normal when the economy fell apart last time, and then when redevelopment disappeared. So here we are again, trying to figure out what the new normal is going to be. And I really do think it's going to take a multi-year approach in order to even get the clarity we need to come up with a really good plan. I did want to bring up the development that has been going on in the city is really quite phenomenal. As a resident in the area, I have to say it's always very exciting to see the bulldozers out there, and to see the action that's going on, but to also be able to see some of these completed projects. And I just have to say, I think they're some of the most beautiful projects that the city has done in years. And kudos to the staff and the team and the council for really kind of putting these projects together. And then super exciting, all of the things that are going on right now. And really the building permit and plan check revenue that is coming from these projects, as well as just the image of these beautiful buildings being added to our community is really quite amazing, and in some ways the silver lining to all of the challenges that we have been going through, particularly in the last 4 or 5 months. It's just kind of exciting to have something so positive moving forward in the community. As Dan mentioned, we are projecting a deficit. 1920, our estimated actual is a deficit of $1.1 million. And I will tell you, largely to Dan's credit, we have worked really hard to actually really fine tune this number. Estimated actual traditionally when we present it to council, because it's happening so early in May, is something that we're still very much guessing about. We still have, several months before we really get all the final invoices and the final revenue receipts. Right now, we are really close to being closed, and we only have, through August, where some of these revenues might still be posted back to the year. And so our guess is very well fine-tuned. So this is really, truly a very strong estimate of what our actual 1920 is going to be. So a deficit of 1.1 million. And then 2021, based on the proposed budget, which we'll talk a little bit more about in detail, we're looking at a deficit of $1.7 million. Traditionally, this is how I kind of go through things. So we're going to stick with this pattern. We're going to first talk about some general fund revenues, general fund expenditures, then maybe some items for discussion. And then we'll go into our other city funds. And at the end, we'll be looking for summing things up and looking for some staff direction so that we can try to finalize this budget and bring it back to you at the end of July for adoption. So revenues. As was mentioned earlier, in March, our sales tax revenue was actually projected way up at $8.2 million. And that really came largely from, 8.257. Yes, okay, just making sure, math on the fly. When we were doing those estimates, it was largely based on the fact that that 5.5 million is what we were estimating in 1920. And ironically, we were not expecting a big increase in our base of that 5.5 because the auto industry was already showing signs of flatlining, not flatlining like dead, but just flatlining like not growing. And so with the passage of Measure D, we really saw this as a steady 5.5 added to the 2.7 of the new revenue. But now we are actually projecting that it will be down to 6.9 million. And that is because that 5.5 is projected right now to go all the way down to 4.8. So that right off the top is a very large amount to just have removed from our budget. And it does remind me of when we went through our economic downturn last time, where we immediately had $1 million just taken off the top so quickly. And, for us, we do have these one-time revenues coming in, but from a structural perspective, that is a gap that we have to find a way to fill because that revenue is now our new baseline, and we need to work our way from there. Property tax revenues and motor vehicle license fees, which are based off of property tax revenue growth, we aren't expecting them to change much in 2021. And largely because property tax revenue tends to kind of be a year or two, maybe even 3 years sometimes behind in reacting to economic downturns. So it really does depend on how quickly things recover, if assessment appeals are going to be filed by property owners, and then once those assessment appeals are put into place, then you would start seeing some impact on the property tax revenue. Same with motor vehicle license fees. So as a result, we are just showing that those revenues are going to be the same. And then again, as we are kind of forecasting out into future years, we'll need to be watching on how maybe there is a longer term impact and potentially a reduction in the future.
Kristen, got a question really quick in regards to the property taxes. Is there a deferment? I believe there is a deferment, right, for the second half of the property tax?
There is a deferment, and again, it is right now projected by LA County that would literally be just a deferment. We don't get any kind of additional penalties from it, but it would come to us, it would be more of a cash flow issue, I would say. If people opt for that, then they have the ability not to pay it, sort of like when we did our income taxes. So we are anticipating that we will receive all of it, but that there may be a cash flow issue depending on how many people opt for it. The other thing about property taxes is that to the extent that somebody doesn't pay it, then those would come back to us in the form of future payments on delinquencies. Because once that property sells, then the delinquent amounts are then paid. So it really is a cash flow issue.
I agree. Yeah, I think there's going to be a cash flow issue. If they choose to defer later on, they still have to pay it. No one's going to go and get away from taxes. So
absolutely, absolutely. We'll have to be careful of that because property tax and MVLF are, pretty substantial revenues for us. And so we have to make sure that our cash flow is staying steady. And that's something we need to look at for the multi-year kind of projections that we'll be doing.
Thank you.
So building permit revenue, again, it's projected in 2021 to be at 1.1 million and plan check revenue projected at 900,000. While those are not as substantial as the amounts that we saw come in 1920, it's still a very positive year for us. If you go back and look at our trends, we are in no way averaging $1 million. We're averaging more back in the 500,000 kind of a range. And so this is an indication of still a very busy year ahead of us, 2021. The project down by the station, as well as continuing general projects over at City of Hope. We really are anticipating that we will continue to see a good year, not a stellar, crazy example year like we had this year, but still a really great year and definitely revenue that is much needed at a time like this. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we do have some kind of short-term impacts on our revenues, particularly because of COVID. And I say short-term because I'm trying to be optimistic that this is just a temporary phase and that COVID is not the world we live in next year. Having said that, we do know that COVID is the world we live in right now, let's say till about December. And that being on our short-term horizon, we have done projections of reduced recreation fees because of reduced programming and reduced parking fees due to reduced enforcement. That will be rolling out, but we will have some time where we would have been collecting those fees and we won't be collecting them. So again, if I were doing a multi-year projection and we're trying to guess if this is something that's long-term, I would say no. Not sure how quickly it ramps back up, but this definitely in the short term is impacting our revenues. Expenditures. Dan touched on this. This is kind of three of our big ones that I would call non-negotiable increases. LA County Sheriff contract this year, 5.5% increase and 11.5% liability trust fund charge. That equates to a $274,000 increase. Last year, I believe it was about 4.9% as far as the increase that we took on, and the liability trust fund last year was 11%, I believe. So we are seeing some gradual increases. And again, that's exponential. Those are CPI increases that just add on top of themselves. So that is a substantial amount, very much replicates what we're seeing on the PERS side. So it's not necessarily out of the ordinary, but it's definitely something that we need to try to size into our budget to have these service levels that we have. 2021 PERS contribution increased to 13% on the first tier. And
can I go back to sheriffs real quickly?
Yes.
Does, I wouldn't know this, but I'm just kind of curious. Do we have any sense of whether they're moving forward with things like body cameras and things like that? There's been talk about them adopting, but is that like a year away or is that a couple years away?
Brian,
I can answer that.
great, thank you.
You're welcome. They're actually rolling out right now. They are in the process of outfitting all the stations with the data systems needed to download and capture and store. They were just in here in the substation last week looking at our facility and where to put all of the equipment. The goal is to have them online by the end of this year. So part of that is what we're seeing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Kristen, I got a question. What the increase? They still dropped the one. They increased our fees, but they decreased our service with the one officer that we lost.
Correct. And Brian, you can probably speak in more detail to this, but the officer that we lost, we did not pay for. And so the officer that we lost, which Brian, you can kind of describe what that role was. It was shared by not just us. This is our contract specifically, and these increases are on top of our paid for officers in our contract.
So yeah, we control the contract and the number of bodies on the contract. So any increases would be from us, with the exception of cost of living or liability trust fund. The sergeant position that is now vacant is a response to the unfunded positions that the sheriff was talking about removing when he did not receive all of the funds he was asking for the Board of Supervisors. Back in 2006, Sheriff Baca had given all of the contract cities a free sergeant. And so prior to that, we were paying and contracting for that position. So we're currently in the position of we're not contracting for that position, and since it was a free position, that has been taken away.
So Brian, this is Brian. So basically, our service is going to continue the same.
It's staying the same unless we decide to change it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so next we have the PERS contribution, which this year, the first tier, which is our original tier plan, and the majority of our employees are still in, increased to 13%. That's from about 12%. And that equates to about a $30,000 increase. And then the unfunded liability, which applies to all employees, that increased to $1 million this year. And that is a $144,000 increase compared to last year. One thing that we did do in the budget this year, when you're looking at your numbers, in the past, we had traditionally allocated unfunded liability to each department based on the salaries in each department. We have pulled that out and actually put it in administrative services so that you can actually see the total amount of unfunded liability, and it just makes it easier to kind of see what that is. As we get different actuarial estimates on what that is, we can relate back to a total number as opposed to having that all broken apart.
Question. I appreciate hearing that. And obviously there's some concern given that CalPERS still is shooting for a 7% income range, a gain on their investments. If we look at this over time, don't we have a total unfunded liability of close to 40 million, somewhere around there? I know that over time that would lessen as the curve of people in the first tier have retired, and as we have more people in the second tier. But at some point, there's a lot of funding that still needs to be made up, because I think realistically, we made commitments years back to our employees at a time when CalPERS we all thought was actually overfunded. But I think the amount that technically today, to our best estimates that we owe, is actually in the tens of millions. Is that correct?
It is tens of millions. And that would be, again, if we had to pay it all off at one time, if the city were to end right now and have to keep every commitment to every retired employee as well as every current employee. But the unfunded liability of $1 million that you're looking at is the annual amount that we need to contribute towards it, so that at the end of the period, it would be paid off. And Dan, is there another way that you would kind of describe that, or did I do that correctly?
No, I think that's just right, Kristen. This is in a way, this is sort of like paying off. This is the 1-year payment on your mortgage, and we're paying off that unfunded liability under the current schedule to pay it off over about the next 27 years or so, 26 years. Now, the city does have an option, and this could be something we look at in going forward. You're paying interest on that unfunded liability, and you save tremendously on interest costs over 20 years or so, 20 years if you pay it off early, just like you save on interest costs if you pay off your home mortgage early. Now, the problem is you're spending more in the early years to do that. So to the extent that you're spending money on that, you're not spending on other things. But that will be an option we can look at in some of our financial planning going forward.
Well, and unlike a lot of mortgages are fixed, this is not only a variable rate, but based on what happens with their earnings, that amount that we owe each year could change substantially.
Yeah, it is a funny thing in that it's not a fixed principal debt. Depending on what the situation is with their actuarial assumptions, it can either go up or it can go even go down if they exceed them over a certain amount of time. That hasn't been the direction it's been going the last 10 years, but you're right. It makes the target keeps changing a little bit, and that's different than a fixed mortgage or the fixed principal payment.
Well, and the risk is going up in terms of the actions being taken to try and hit that 7% target that they need to meet. So I think they're taking riskier actions.
Right, that's right.
And there's
They're
no
all on red.
interests.
Also, I just wanted to add, we also do have, for example, one of the, it's a nominal amount, but it makes a difference. We are prepaying the unfunded liability based on council's direction to set up a irrevocable trust fund for the PARS, with PARS for the unfunded liability. And by prepaying the $1 million, we actually have about $33,000 that we will be saving and contributing to the unfunded liability PARS account. And so that's an example of kind of starting to pay down, not sending the money to PERS, but when they do the calculation of our unfunded liability, they will take into account the additional amounts that are sitting in that account, and it will offset it. So that is something that, we hope to continue to do. And to the extent that we were making a decision to prepay some of this unfunded liability, we would also look at what the benefits are of doing it to the PARS account versus sending it to PERS. Okay, unless there's anything else on that, I'm going to move on to the GASB 75 actuarial report. Now, this is, again, kind of similar to an unfunded liability. This is the report that actually looks at the commitments we've made for future retiree healthcare costs and basically tells you what your total amount is and how much you should be setting aside every year in order to fund that by the end. Just similar to what we just talked about, the $1 million that has to do with retirement, the $782,000 you see here has to do with retiree healthcare. And this is a $116,000 increase over the prior year. And a lot of this has to do, again, with changes in demographics. When the actuarials are looking at these reports, they're looking at how long people are living, how much does healthcare cost, and we just continue to see increases in both those. People are living longer, and it's costing more for healthcare. So that will increase our amounts. I did want to point out that these reports are only good for so long, and so this year we will be looking at having to update our GASB 75 report. And so I'm crossing my fingers that it might be positive, and we might find that, it won't be growing as exponentially as it has in the past, but all indicators are that, again, people are living longer and healthcare is costing more.
Well, this is all, we used to do this on a pay-as-you-go, but I think as the population's been aging and more people end up retiring, I think that's part of why they changed the GASB to take ostensibly an approach much as the retirement system is. So I think we are paying more than what we would do as a pay-as-you-go, but we should also end up avoiding some of the spikes down the road. Is that correct?
Absolutely. In fact, that 782,000 is the total amount that is recommended, including the pay-as-you-go. So what ends up happening is the GASB 75 report will tell you you need to contribute 782. At the end of the year, we deduct all of the pay-as-you-go, and we send the remaining amount to our healthcare PARS account. And again, when they do the actuarial report, they will look at what our total obligation, our total unfunded, call it liability for healthcare is, and they will take into account the money that is sitting in that account, which is irrevocably pledged towards healthcare. So same type of an arrangement, like you said, we did not used to have that requirement. And now that requirement, which it's a good practice no matter what, but that requirement from an accounting perspective shows up in your audited financial statements if you are not meeting that number, and it will basically report out that you're not making your full contribution. So that's why we always aim to do that.
Kristen, this is Liz.
Yes.
Okay. Is the COVID-19 going to have any effect, do you think, on the actuarial report?
So the actuarial reports are all based on the economy and based on how long people are living and the cost of healthcare. So I would say absolutely yes. Yeah, as far as trying to predict how much or what the impact will be, you know, I can't guess that kind of a level of detail, but absolutely it will impact it, because investment earnings, healthcare costs, all of that the actuarial takes into account when they're looking at what these long-term amounts truly are.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. So those are kind of three of the big non-negotiable kind of items. And then I wanted to go over some of the expenditures that are included in this budget that are not necessarily negotiable, but kind of reflections of projects that are going on or priorities of the city. So for example, the Civic Center courtyard design, and there is a planned city council workshop. We really would prefer to try to do this one in person, so we were hoping that we will be able to do this post-COVID live. But basically, we are at a point where they have begun the design, but we really need to meet with council and get some feedback on landscaping and layout and whatnot. So that had originally been planned for last year, started a little bit, but because of COVID, we have moved this into this next budget with the goal of trying to accomplish that this year. You will also recall that we actually have some CDBG funds that we had set aside for that also, in order to address some of the ADA improvements that would be required with that redesign. So we do have, once we get past design and get an estimate of what it would cost to do it, some funds that we've been kind of earmarking for that project. So design and construction of street lighting along Huntington mixed use project. This is the Huntington mixed, I was gonna ask if, I'm not sure who, maybe somebody could mute that. There we go. Design and construction of the street lighting is special lighting that's gonna go along the Huntington mixed use project. It's about $100,000. There is funds in the community benefit fund that we're gonna be utilizing for that, which are designated. ADA assessment of the Duarte Historical Museum building. We did an ADA assessment of all of our facilities prior to the MOU with the Duarte Historical Museum, where we have taken over the maintenance of that building. So we're going to be looking at an ADA assessment to add it to our transition plan. So that way council can kind of put that in line with all our other ADA work and prioritize accordingly for future improvements. We are going to, fingers crossed, finalize the Climate Tech infrastructure modernization improvements. And so that should be able to wrap up within the next fiscal year. And remember, we do have a loan that we have taken out that fully reimburses that. And then I talk later about, oh, there you go, 2 lines down. this is the first year of starting to actually repay that loan at $220,000, and it is a 15-year loan. And once the modernization improvements are completed, we should be seeing savings that equate to, if not more, than what our repayment of that loan is. We also this year are having to transfer $674,000 to the Housing Authority. Now that is due to the $3 million that Dan referred to, our final SA loan repayment. For every dollar that we get back, paying the city back for that loan, the post redevelopment law requires that 20% of it be designated for affordable housing. So you will see a one-time transfer because that is one-time repayment in the budget. The other thing I wanted to point out is that there are no reductions in general funds for public safety, including youth programs and all part-time staffing. We had back when this all started, we went to all departments and asked for everybody to give us lists of proposals for reductions in order to try to balance our budget. And post-COVID, post-Measure D, and post speaking with council, we can see that it is a priority for us to make sure that those youth programs continue funded as is, and the part-time staffing and service level that comes with that for the CSOs and the animal control continue as is in the current 2021 budget. There also are no reductions. Yes.
Sorry, this is Brian. So that
Yeah.
includes no cuts to any of our youth programs that the city currently offers.
Correct.
Like art and the other programs that we have.
Exactly. I think we originally had something like $7,000 or $10,000. We were losing some grant funding, and so that was going to be sized back down to call it pre-grant kind of funding.
Okay.
But we have recommended in this budget that you go ahead and fund that completely. I think we can all agree that the programming that the city, has had in that way, the preventive work that we have done has really made a difference. And it's interesting because as a person kind of sitting back and watching other communities trying to address their public safety issues, the things they're proposing sound very much like what you're already implementing. Right? I think if anything, Duarte is a pretty good model for making sure that you're addressing, social issues while you're also dealing with public safety enforcement. So that's the recommendation in this budget.
Thanks, Rissa.
You bet. And then also Parks and Recreation. Again, it's another finger of kind of what we're talking about. And so making sure that we have the programming to keep our youth active and keep them involved, super important. The one thing I will say is a little bit unique, that several of our programs, just because of COVID, can't quite roll out the way they used to or have the numbers that we normally would. So any reductions that you do see in there for Parks and Rec, you're kind of going to see it on the revenue side as well as on the expense side. Like I said earlier, we really anticipate that as a short-term caused by COVID kind of thing. And then I think many of those programs you can evaluate in our next budget and decide whether it's special events that this time aren't going to happen. Do we still need to do them? Well, then we'll evaluate that next year post-COVID. Because again, I think there are some opportunities, and I'll talk a little bit about the Finance Ad Hoc Committee, to make sure we're being efficient in both the programming we're providing as well as the events, that we're not overlapping, that we're really bang for the buck doing great things. But right now, the ones that aren't included in there are simply not included in there because we really can't do them with the restrictions we have. And so next year will be a good time for us to evaluate when we get back to what I call a more normal post-COVID kind of setting. So here are some legitimate cost savings that are included in your budget. City manager's office, as you know, the staff in that office has been restructured. With some vacancies that have happened, it gave Dan really the opportunity to kind of take a step back and look at his department and decide how he best felt he could run that. And to our advantage, it gave us a cost savings. And so there is a substantial cost savings in the way he has decided to restructure that office. And it really is an example, and you can kind of see with the numbers, it is an example of a substantial restructuring and something that is an ongoing savings that can react to ongoing revenues. So it is a good example. Moving NPDS costs to Measure M and W. We already had NPDS costs that were going to be going to Measure W. However, in the past, the general fund had borne a lot of the NPDS expenses. And Measure M as well as Measure R both provide opportunities to use those resources for NPDS projects. So looking at kind of diversifying the revenues that were being used, going to some of the stricter revenues, more restrictive, revenues, as opposed to the general fund, it resulted in this recommendation, which is a $260,000 savings. And I'll talk in the other funds about what those projects are that are going to Measure M and Measure W.
They're somewhat
Kristen,
road related, I think, for
Yeah,
Measure M.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding both Measure M and Measure W. Is that money that has to be applied for, or is it a grant that we automatically get annually?
It is an annual amount that we get. These are not special applications. There is such a thing, particularly with Measure M, I'm aware of, that you can apply for special projects. This is just our annual allocation. And if you look at the fund balances in Measure M and Measure W, you can kind of, well, actually Measure W is new, but in Measure M, you can kind of see that the fund balances kind of build up as the revenues come in annually, and then we tend to do projects.
But it's a local return that goes straight to the cities, and there's certain rules on how you use it. It
Yes.
is our money.
Yes. And then the next one is really a deferral. Deferring the South Yard design plan. There had been discussion about this. The South Yard not having the buses down there anymore, down at that location anymore, how we might utilize that space differently. And so the idea is that eventually we would bring somebody in to do a comprehensive design of that space, potentially putting new buildings down there. And so we have deferred that project for now. In the interim, we are working with temporary kind of storage buildings, existing ones, and kind of working out the different parking that's going on with the various vehicles that we have. And so far so good, but clearly not the most efficient of usage of space.
Kristen, do we own that land?
Interesting question. I could defer to Craig, but let me try to answer it. The property actually is, I believe, Army Corps of Engineers, and there is an easement over the property that actually shows the continuation of the road, which in effect makes it city property for the road. But if you were to look on a map, I do not believe that it actually shows the city as the owner. Did I describe that kind of correctly, Craig?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, it is a paper street, city paper street. If it were to be vacated, which we wouldn't do, there's a question as to where it would go back to, but the city has the right to use it for what it's being used for. If we were to use it for something that would be non-service related, we couldn't sell it off for residential, but we have the right to use it for what it's being used for.
Do we ultimately own it, or is it Army Corps of Engineer?
It's like a paper street, so it is like the cities. It's like any other city street. It's like Huntington Drive. It just doesn't have it's a street to nowhere basically, and it goes almost all the way down to the 605 freeway.
Okay. Do we own that? Is that under our jurisdiction?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Meaning we do own it, right? Okay.
It's actually a better way to say it is we control it. It's not like a lot we own, but it's a street that we own.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
clearly that could be something, Mayor, that gets discussed more when we're talking about the design. Since we're deferring it, we'll have some more time to go over it, because it is, I mean, it is an interesting piece of property as far as the history of how it kind of all became. Okay, so here is an example of a cost savings that came from really kind of doing things a little bit more efficiently. We are proposing that we eliminate the after-school supervised park program and instead increase the day camp programs during the holidays, in the summers, and during any kind of breaks that the school has. And I believe part of this is that the after-school programs at the schools have Think Together, which in many ways is competing with our after-school supervised park program. But at the same time, Think Together does not operate, as I understand it, during the breaks. And so this really is a more efficient way, I think, of meeting a need and not duplicating a need, but yet it has a cost savings. And did you, Manuel, did you maybe want to speak to kind of your discussions with the schools about this?
Yeah, just based off of the feedback from the director over at overseeing the extended care program at all of the school sites, and also feedback from staff just in terms of participation that we're seeing at the sites where we had staff showing up and waiting to receive students, but majority of them obviously those that are needing care, and the convenience of it already being on the school site and not having to walk to a park site, just felt like we would maximize our dollars and better utilize them on a time where Think Together is not offering service, like this past summer or even now this summer, where they're not offering supplemental programming because they don't have the grant funds anymore.
Thank you.
Oh.
So again, another deferral. Based on the conditions, we feel that we can defer the Royal Oaks Park Tennis Court resurfacing for another year. That ends up being a $37,000 savings. And then this one has to do, again, with utilizing more restricted and specialized funding. We're recommending that the Duarte Park play equipment that's being recommended for replacement actually be funded by Measure A. And just to clarify, is about twice this, right, Manuel? About $300,000 for the total project costs. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
So originally it had been proposed that about 150 of it would come from the general fund and 150 would come from Measure A. So what we're really looking to do is defer this to Measure A until it accumulates enough funds to actually do the entire project.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is $150,000 savings in our current budget while we wait for the other funds to accumulate.
Which play equipment are we talking about? Is it overall the whole entire city, or are we specifying?
Just at Duarte Park. This is literally one playground and the surface underneath it. Okay.
So,
go ahead.
I got a question. I'm sorry.
No
so
problem.
that one project is $300,000?
That is correct.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's playground equipment is not cheap. Not like the one I have at my house. So, but it is, and the playground surface. I mean, if you look at it and even think the surface itself is, the same price as the play equipment, it just kind of shows these are substantial investments for sure.
I'm in the wrong business.
Right. Okay.
What I used to say, Tony.
Yeah. Okay, so then another savings that is being recommended is to eliminate the human resources intern position. That's actually in my department. And what we have found is kind of twofold. First of all, I do think there are opportunities for interns who are willing to come in and get experience and not be paid. But more importantly, I think for this one in particular, is that what we found is that HR is a very unique department. It's a little bit different than, say, planning, where they come in with some very specific college taught skills that then they can bring and apply. HR ends up being, it's a very broad topic, very general, and it's not necessarily something that somebody has actually learned at school. So they end up doing a lot more clerical work than really digging into the guts of HR when they're working with us. So we decided that it was something that we could give up, both because we don't see as much value for the intern, as well as we were looking for cost savings, and in administrative services, it's kind of hard to do that. So we also are recommending that we reduce recruiting advertising. We did a lot of obviously big recruiting over the last 2 or 3 years, and think that we can handle a lot of that in-house, and unless we have, you know, some really specialized positions that we think we can't recruit here locally with our own connections and advertising, we think that we can make a $28,000 savings on that. And then finally, really, this is something that council already approved, but you'll really start seeing the savings of it in the 2021 budget, is implementing the enterprise fleet lease program. Ultimately, that is projected to save us $41,000 in going to a lease program over the program that we have now, which is basically replacing and purchasing, and frankly letting vehicles get very old. And so we are looking at the fuel savings, as well as the maintenance savings, as well as the kind of purchasing power and sale power that comes with using that enterprise fleet lease program, coming back and really kind of generating some savings for us.
Kristen, does insurance also come with that? Car insurance? What items exactly with the lease?
Yes, so the lease actually has a maintenance program in it. And so there is maintenance that is included in it, but on insurance, we actually insure ourselves. So it doesn't change the insurance, but I will tell you that the liability is reduced by having newer vehicles that are coming in on being replaced on a more quick basis than we have in the past.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I've noticed Victoria's letting me know that we do have 3 questions. So I could take a moment here, if you don't mind, to kind of pause and kind of have her read those questions to us, and then we can kind of direct those to whoever needs to help us answer them.
So the first question we have is from George Farah, asking, how will reduction of sheriff budget by County Board of Supervisors affect the services we receive in Duarte?
So Brian, I'm kind of thinking that he's speaking because the only reduction really that I'm aware of is the one that you spoke to about the sergeant. Maybe you can speak to what his role was before and how we're going to be gap filling that, or how that might impact services to the community.
Well, as I understood the question, he was asking about the Board of Supervisors and their funding or lack of funding for the full amount that the sheriff was requesting, and how that's going to impact us. And part of that is losing the sergeant, but that was even pre, I guess, budget discussion. The sheriff was looking at it and eliminated that position prior to them really coming out with the actual number that they were reducing the sheriff's department. So he did release all unfunded positions, those being sergeants and any other positions at stations that weren't being allocated for by costs, either by contract or by the sheriff's department. The other thing we're looking at is he's freezing all promotions as of now. He is curtailing some recruitment. So really what we start to see is what we've seen in the past when we've had slowdowns in hiring and promotions, is you have a reduction in costs initially of the contract, but as we find out later and they try to ramp back up and increase positions and promotions, that costs do increase down the road. We also see a somewhat limited decrease in the ability to have adequate sergeants at stations because you have retirements and they don't fill in behind them. You start to see a lack of movement within the sheriff's department because there aren't positions leaving because there's nobody to replace. So we're going to look at how that trends. I think the last big time we saw something like this was quite a few years ago, that on this scale anyway. So it's hard to project. It doesn't decrease anything we're doing right now in the sheriff. We will still have the contracted bodies. We still have the same amount of bodies. Potentially the biggest hit we do face is not loss of the sergeant. And, you know, we'll have to somewhere down the road look if we want to contract for a sheriff or sergeant position or just go without a sergeant position. That's going forward.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question?
Brian, just I just, if you may, can you just enlighten us again in regards to the cost of a deputy right now, holistically, meaning altogether, how much would it cost?
Holistically, pulling it up. I was looking for those numbers before we were going because I had sent them.
I actually have it right here, Brian.
Thank you, Kristen. I know I'd sent it to you. I was looking for that email.
No problem. So let's see. The first year cost would be about $260,000 because in the first year they kind of give you this like discount rate, and in the second year it would be about $357,000.
And that's correct. And that's really for 40-hour, what's called, because you contract by minutes deputy. So much like our overlap cars, they're 5 days a week. And so they get filled in behind, but that's not even a 7-day-a-week car. So that's if you were to add which is what we recently added, was the overlap car on day shift.
Okay. All right, Victoria, another question?
Okay, our second question comes from Mike Tarr. In reference to unfunded liability, he asked, why wasn't this funded years ago? Why did the city allow this to go so high?
So unfunded liability, that really has to do with what unfunded liability is. And unfunded liability has everything to do with what John kind of referred to. Back when the city agreed to certain enhancements for the employees, they were told that there really would be no increase to costs. And then because of loss in investments, as well as change in actuarial assumptions about how long people are living and what the cost of retirement is, that amount that we need to set aside for the future has increased exponentially. And so if, let's just pretend, tomorrow we made this killing on the market and made a whole bunch of money, the unfunded liability literally could go away because we would have so much money sitting there waiting to make this payment. But the reality is that over the years, the losses and the changes in assumptions have really made this number get higher and higher. And the idea that it wasn't going to cost us anything is no longer true. Dan, do you have anything to add to that, or John?
No, I think you said it well, Kristen. I mean, in terms of the city role in that, the city contributes to CalPERS in response to what CalPERS requests the city to contribute on a sound actuarial basis. So the city has, like other cities, has kept up with the funding requests. The difference has been over really since about the year 2000, CalPERS has missed a lot of their assumptions, both on the asset side, in terms of the assumed rate of return versus the actual rate of return on their assets. And then on the liability side, like you said, Kristen, their expectations of retirement ages, of longevity, of raises, of a whole host of actuarial assumptions have just been wrong. So the result is, while they've tried to fund it in full, they have not succeeded in doing so, and that is how the unfunded liability built. And now they are trying to make that up, and it's a difficult time, and it's going to be difficult for about the next 20 to 30 years, again, for us and for every city. And frankly, you're seeing this at the nationwide level when you look at Medicare and Social Security. There's nothing unique about this with city government. You just see it very concentrated here.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, we have another question.
We have another question from Thomas Sue, I think is how you say the last name. For those non-negotiable items being presented, so about a 500K increase, will these increases be added every year from now on?
If I were doing a projection, because again, I'm not sure, basically projections are all about, trying to look at the trends and what you think is going to happen. The LA County Sheriff's contract, for example, having cost of living increases and liability trust fund, those are based on what's negotiated with the sheriffs themselves. The liability trust fund has to do with all of the cases that are being settled in the legal settlements that are coming out of that. If I had to trend off of what was happening in the last few years and what I might guess in the future, I would say yes. I would anticipate that something in that range we would be looking at in the future. As far as PERS contributions, Dan had that table earlier where he showed that in a worst case scenario of what would happen from an investment performance perspective, we could be looking at 100% increase, and but then somewhere maybe closer to 40 or 50% if they actually are able to perform closer to what they expect. So again, I do think that that one is also going to be in our future. And as far as retiree healthcare costs, kind of what Councilmember Riley brought up, right now I'm not seeing anything on the horizon that would indicate that healthcare is going to get cheaper for us. So I would anticipate that we would see increases similar, maybe not as drastic. It has a lot to do with those actuarial reports that have to do with performance and lifespan and all of that. But I do think that it would be a good guess to assume that we would be looking at increases like this in the short term.
John Fasana, just adding on to some of this, in terms of PERS, there were changes made in the late 1990s that really allowed cities and counties and local governments, even the state, to pay out at higher formulas. I think in 2 negotiating periods, there were requests to increase the formulas. At the time, CalPERS assured us that we were all overfunded in terms of the retirement. I think in one case, the discussion was we could give increases in salary, could give increases in retirement. But because the CalPERS system is so overfunded, that increasing the retirement formula would make sense. And I think that worked for the employees as well. Since then, and certainly once you got into the mid-2000 decade, after all these changes were made, and really, I think 3/4 to 80% of the cities adopted increased formulas. There were different levels and tiers of what were done. But actually, it's affected the employees as well, because the employees and the city have had to increase what has been paid in. In subsequent negotiations, we had to go back and say, look, we agreed to these increases. They have been requested. They're better formulas for the employees, but the costs are not affordable at this point based on the reality being different than what we had all been told. So we've seen the increases that the employees have been paid, the employers have paid, but there's still gaps based on CalPERS actual earnings and the actual costs and the changes in lifespan and so on versus what had been projected in the late 90s, early 2000s.
And one thing I did want to point out, the council is aware of the fact that Duarte actually was one of the first agencies to actually adopt a second tier. And so we are finding that as we have closed that first tier and we have employees leave us, that our new employees are coming in the second and the third tier, which don't, they're more like 7% as opposed to the 13%. And so that does, when you're looking at a comparison, it does become more sustainable to have these additional tiers. Okay, and do we have one more?
We do. We have one more question from Stephanie Kovach in regards to the cost saving slide. Think Together has always been underfunded and waitlisted. Has the city received any information about 2021 funding for Think Together before deciding to cut the park after school program?
Manuel, are you familiar at all with Think Together not being what they were this last year?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question one more time, please? If I'm familiar with Think Together.
Yeah, the question is asking if Think Together's budget for 2021, what their budget looks like before deciding to cut the park after school program.
I'm not familiar with their budget and how that plays in. I know that it is grant funded through ACES dollars. And I know it's a 5-year term, and then they generally re-up.
And last we spoke with them, I believe they had said that it was funded in this next year, but I'm not sure where in that 5 years. Do you know?
No, I'm not certain of that, but I can definitely reach out to the director and get that information.
Yeah, no, that would be great for us to know.
Okay.
I do know that, in fact, we had received, comment about the fact that there wasn't enough day camp, or I should say supervision in the holidays because Think Together wasn't there. But it would be good for us to know during the actual school year and confirm that they are going to continue as they have in the last years.
Mayor Pro Tem, didn't you used to work for Think Together?
Yes, I did. And my last understanding was that they did indeed lose funding, not at the same level as the prior budget, but let's just say after school wasn't a big priority with all the, the cuts that had to be made and the adjustments. So I could find out the exact number. Let me text somebody and see if I could find out.
And who knows what's going to happen in the next school year? Are we going to have full-on school? There's a lot of uncertainties right over there too. I think we should defer some of those questions to the school district. Are we really going to have, full-time schools, or are we going to do, I think, half virtual and half going to be there? Who knows what's going to happen? And
the school district's running scenario planning, but they don't even know yet based on what's going on with the virus.
What's going to happen to the parent? What's going to happen? There's a lot of uncertainties there.
I believe we have the school district coming to our next council meeting. So they are going to give us at least what they know at that point, but it'd be a great opportunity for us to, ask further questions. Okay, that's the questions we have for right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on, but if people have other questions, please feel free to send those in, and we will find another spot to pause and talk about them. So this is, I made reference to it earlier, some of the things that are really what I would call deferred. They are cost savings, but they are projects or events that we do not anticipate we will be able to do because of COVID. Again, some of these have been suggested that we evaluate and look at whether or not these are events that we want to do in the future, but we don't need to evaluate that right now because frankly, they're not an option right now. But we should be doing that as part of our next budget process. So not having concerts this summer, reducing special events like the movie nights and Splashtacular, and eliminating the city picnic. We do still have in the budget some other special events, and largely it's because of the timing of when they might come, or for example, we're proposing to still do a decorate your home holiday activity around the holidays, which would be something that you could still do even if COVID were still active at that time.
Kristen, this is Liz, and there's one other thing, the Route 66 parade. If we're not having a city picnic, we are not going to be having a Route 66 parade, and that would be $8,000.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I left it in the budget only because I feel like that ends up being driven by, the community nonprofit kind of organizations, and if they do opt to do it, that money...
They've already said they're not doing it. If
they
there's
did.
no picnic, Yeah, if there's no picnic, there's not going to be a parade because those two were tied in to have one come and then stay for the other.
Yeah, definitely. If I can get a confirmation on that, I
Okay.
totally agree.
I will get that for you.
That would be fabulous.
Hey,
Thank you.
just for the record, I think when I was the mayor, we didn't have a parade. And then I'm the mayor again. There's no parade.
There's something about you, Sam.
Don't take it personal there.
It kind of makes you wonder what the mayor did, since he really didn't want a parade this year, if he's responsible for all this.
Oh my God.
For you.
Okay, so this really takes the proposed budget and applies it to the unassigned projected fund balance. Dan had spoken before in looking at how much we have as far as unassigned available reserve. We are estimating right now, and it is a really good fine-tuned number, right around $6.6 million. And so if we are running a deficit of 1.7, then we are looking at about $8.3 million that would be available, almost 8.4 that would be available at the end of this 2021 proposed budget year. So while that $8 million is, you know, a very attractive dollar amount, as you can see, if we continue to run these deficits, that will dwindle pretty quickly, and we do need to come up with a way that we can start resolving these deficits further than we already have with the cuts that we've incorporated into this budget. One of the things I also wanted to just bring up, because we are talking about this being solved potentially over a longer range multi-year plan. Go ahead.
Question really quick.
Yes.
I just want to go to the booklet tag number 2, the first page when we go to expenditure. I'm just looking at the numbers that the estimated actual fiscal year for 19 and 20, and then the recommended 20 and 21. I'm just looking down at the numbers right now. What you're showing me earlier on the PowerPoint, I mean, they're significant, but they're quite minute to the $20 million expenditures. I'm just looking down at the expenditure tab on the 2021. I noticed that the community development went up almost $1 million, and then the administrative services went up almost $1 million. Can I have some clarifications or understandings why they went up when I think most went down?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, on community development, one of the real big items in there is that is where the Climate Tech second year finish up $1.4 million is. So the expenses are going up because of the finishing of that project. On administrative services, on that one, I mentioned that we took all of the unfunded liability costs from all the other departments and we consolidated it in one location. So about $1 million worth of expenses has moved to administrative services. So the unfunded liabilities in each of those departments, in fact, you will see amounts, they will actually be a little bit less in each department, I mean, depending on what other projects they have. But we consolidated in administrative services. So that would be about $1 million of the increase in there. We also, go ahead.
Thank you for the clarification. And I just want to go ahead and tell the audience one more time is, the $1.4 million from Climate Tech, that is the money that we're borrowing. So I thought we're not taking that money out, we're getting a loan from it. And the loan cost of it would be, let's just say, for example, arbitrarily, let's say the loan cost would be 3%. I think it was like 3.5%, right? If I do recall correctly. And the savings we're going to go ahead and get from the cost expenditures from the utilities would be way more. Thus, that's why overall it's going to go ahead and be a positive savings for the city. So I just want to let people understand that really quick. The $1.4 million, we're actually lending that money, or we're borrowing that money. We're using OPM, other people's money. The cost of that is going to be a lot less than the actual savings we're going to go ahead and get. That's why the delta is going to be positive. It's a good thing for us.
Absolutely. And in fact, really the climate tech, when you're looking at the numbers, is a wash, because when you look on the revenue side under reimbursements from other funds, that's where that loan amount is coming in. And then when you look at the expenses in community development, that's where the cost of the climate tech is going out. Now, the savings, like you said, we would anticipate that those savings start showing up because the overall utility expenses, which are going to appear both in the general fund in facilities as well as in the lighting and landscape district, we will start seeing reduced expenses in utilities such as water and electricity.
So just for clarification, so $1.4 million is the cost of capital, right?
Say it one more time, please.
It's the cost of the improvement. It's the capital improvement.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, no, the total amount was $2.7 million, I believe. And do I have that number right? Yes. And so we have expenses both in 1920 as well as expenses in 2021 to wrap up the project.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So what I wanted to bring up is this is something to kind of start considering as we move forward, as we really look at, as Dan suggested, multi-year forecasting, multi-year ideas on how to shore this up. So when we had the ad hoc finance committee, they were able to get to a point where they had their top 7 recommendations. And so just to remind you, they had the sales tax revenue measure, which is underlined because that actually did get implemented. But they made a point of saying that, you know, we shouldn't just be looking at one option. We should be looking into as many as we possibly can. So of those others, parking permit increases, that would be an increase to revenue. Waste surcharge, again, an increase to revenue. Reducing city special events, which we talked a little bit about, just being more efficient and, you know, maybe assessing city events to see if there are ones that we would want to eliminate. And then there was a discussion of eliminating a sheriff position, increasing the TOT, which is the hotel tax, and freezing full-time salary. Those were the top 7 that had been recommended by the ad hoc committee.
And I think it's
if you're not speaking, if you can place yourself on mute, just because the side you can hear other stuff. But then also to Kristen, there is a question just popped up, but it's talking about the previous slide. So I just know it's kind of timely. I think if you can take a look at that question.
Sure. Thank you. Is it somebody who needs to be unmuted? I've already asked. Okay, hold on. I need to go in. Hold on just one sec. Is it George Farah?
Yeah, and I already unmuted.
Yeah, Mr. Farah, you are able to speak if you'd like to ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Go to the previous slide. The 2021, yes, that bottom number, 8.3 million.
Yes.
That's incorrect. The 1.7 million should be subtracted from the 6.594 million, and that would give a much lower projected fund balance. You've added the 1.7 to the 6.5. That 1.7 should be subtracted.
So what you aren't seeing inside of here is that unassigned projected fund balance. And let me show a table just to clarify that for you. That's not a straight down math, because the unassigned projected fund balance actually includes the repayment of the successor agency loan. So let me show you a different table and that'll answer your question. Hold on one sec. Bear with me, let me just pull up the right tab. It is tab 2, actually, the one that the mayor had referred to earlier. Okay, so if you look on here, can you see, is it showing okay? You guys can see that table?
Yeah.
Okay, so down at the very bottom, estimated ending fund balance. The estimated ending fund balance is actually $13.2 million, and it starts at the 14.9 and it goes to the 13.2. However, we're focusing on the available cash, unassigned, cash that's not restricted to anything else, and cash that is not land, say, held for resale or anything like that. So on the unassigned cash, it actually increased by $8.3 million. And a big portion of that, I don't know if you can actually see when I'm moving my...
Yes, I see. Yeah. And thank you for the clarification.
No, you're very, and I apologize, that was not very self-explanatory in what I showed. But hopefully that clears it up for you.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay, now let me try to... I'm pretty good at this, but I'm not super great. Let me just try to get back to.
And Mr. Farr, this is Dan Jordan, the city manager. I want to commend you on your quick math skills, because you're right. When you look at that table, it quickly doesn't add. But it's the strange thing where we have a loan being paid off, so it increases our cash flow, but the asset count is the same.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. And perfect. Okay, let's see. I think I was here. So we talked about the top 7 recommendations. There were even other ideas that had come up. And obviously, more brainstorming needs to be had. And I think even with our new leadership in Dan joining us, that there's going to be a lot of really creative and great ideas that are going to come down the pipe. But other deficit reduction ideas that have come up, service fee increases. We have not increased our service fees since I think the end of 2016, beginning of 2017. So that would be an opportunity to bring in more revenue. Obviously, we want to be sensitive to kind of what's going on with our economy right now and how we impact our residents. But all of these proposed increases to revenue are something that we should at least look at and kind of educate ourselves and decide if it's something we want to implement. Business fees on Airbnb, that came up, I think, recently at a council meeting. And so that is potentially a fee that could be established, or maybe council will decide it's something that we just want to restrict from having happen. And then other deficit reduction ideas on the side of expenses. Again, reducing recruiting and advertising. We've implemented that once. We can take that further. Freezing further expansion of the holiday decor program, eliminate subsidy of outside sports programs, reducing parks programming and operating hours, and reducing the workforce. All of those came up in discussions with the ad hoc finance committee. Really, the group kind of centered around those other 7. And so this was sort of the brainstorming that was going on with that group, and something I think we need to continue to do as we are looking for solutions. I did want to jump on a couple other city funds. Remember, we have the general fund. That definitely is our big focus of today's discussion. But
Kristen,
we also, yes.
Sorry about that. Can you go back to that other slide, the previous slide? Can you tell us a little bit, can you tell us a little bit more about the Airbnb? If we were to, let's just say, implement some kind of tax for the Airbnb, the lessors, how do we get the taxes from them? I mean, would it be a TOT taxes with Airbnb? Would they allocate some of that funding and then they're going to go ahead and give it to us?
Yeah, Brian, can you go ahead and give them a little a little glimmer into your presentation, maybe?
I can. That's why I unmuted and put my video on. So actually, at the next council meeting, I believe on the 14th, I'm bringing basically a study session for council for recommendations. But what I've found is that most cities charge a permit or a business license and capture their fees that way. Capturing TOT is a really hard and difficult subject for those that don't have basically destination cities, Palmdale, Palm Desert, Big Bear, those types, because they have a lot of rentals. I find it a little easier, but when you have so few, it's almost impossible to try and find and capture those dates that it's actually rented. So cities like us that are smaller, have less rentals, tend to go through the business permit process and capture their fees that way.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I spoke a little bit to Measure M and Measure W. We have about $520,000 in NPDS expenditures. There's a project, called Thule Pond. There is a feasibility study that's being done, and then Royal Oaks Park Drywell. Those are just some examples of some of the big implementations that are starting to come down on NPDS projects. Measure R, like we mentioned, or actually I didn't mention this yet. As you know, it came to you at a recent council meeting that you did do an approval for the contract for the sidewalk program. Because it has come so late in the fiscal year, that will actually be paid out in fiscal year 2021. So you're looking at $150,000 for the 1920 sidewalk program, plus $150,000 we're budgeting for the next year sidewalk program. So we'll spend $300,000 in Measure R in the current year, proposed budget. In gas tax, one I wanted to point out, I said 20,000 twice, but the Buena Vista Kelwell signal, the actual study was completed this last year, and it did meet warrants. And so we have $20,000 in there for the design, and then we would be coming back with the actual cost to council for consideration. SB1, 2021 street rehab project, 300,000, and we have steadily been doing that the last 2 years, gradually working our way and doing street rehab throughout the city. And then CDBG, we have allocated $50,000 for ADA curb ramp project throughout the city, which we have steadily done as well. So that really kind of concludes the details of what I was going to go over. Obviously, council at this point can go through, ask questions, ask me to expand on more details, or staff. And then really what the goal is for council to give us some direction on items that are, you are liking, not liking, and then the final budget, my goal is to bring that back at the end of July for your consideration.
Hey, Christian, I have a question.
Yes.
Measure R doesn't pay for the curbs. You can't get Measure R to pay for the curbing program.
Measure R can be utilized for that as well, as does gas tax and CDBG and even I'll bet you Measure M. Yep, as long as it's along a roadway.
Okay, then why are we using CBDG funds if we can use Measure R funds?
Because we try to diversify all of the different funds that we are using. CDBG is probably one of the most restrictive. And I don't know, Craig, I mean, maybe you can speak to the CDBG process. Is that it also goes to council separately as a program approval?
That's true. We have historically, with the CDBG funds, done the curb ramp project. As you do that each year, it becomes pretty simple. We just put it out to bid, and we know the priority of the ramps that we need to have done throughout the city, and it's a long-term project to get all the ramps finished. So in a sense, I think Kristen's right, is also with all these funds, we're spreading them out to use them as wisely as possible. And I think you see some of the funds like Measure R and Measure M that get used for lots of other things.
Mr. Fasana?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just going back over the slides, I'm fine with most of what's been presented here. I'm willing to go forward with it. There was a slide from the ad hoc committee where they talked about the holiday decorations. And given everything else going on in the current environment, if we held off on the expansion of those at least for a year or so, I'd be okay with that. I'm not going to be around, but I'd be all right with that. And then the other thing is, I think at some point, I know it wasn't included in this presentation, but and I've heard from residents about this. I've been a big advocate of our partnership with Foothill Transit on the transit buses. I know others on the council have had concern about the ridership. I think with COVID, the ridership, maybe even with the fees, or the fares, I should say, the ridership is down even more. So I think we need to hear more about what's going on with that and figure out what we're going to do with that asset and how it's being rolled out, whether we need to adjust fares, looking at ridership, and just kind of what our plan is for that. COVID's definitely given it a shot while we've been rolling this thing out, but I think we need to look at it. Or my successors need to look at it.
You're right. I have a question, Sam.
I don't like the way that sounds, John.
Go ahead.
One of the things that was brought up at one of the council meetings was that there were some change orders for climate tech in the lighting in the parks and a couple other things. That's something that's just going to be coming back to the council to discuss whether or not we want to do those change orders, because that amounted to $150,000 is a lot of money.
And Dan, can you speak? Is that scheduled for an upcoming agenda, or how will we be handling that?
No, we have anticipating that as a discussion item for this evening, and possibly bringing it back if we would like. Those Councilmember Riley are in the budget, that $145,000. Craig is prepared to talk about that tonight. Whether to go with one or both of those items. And again, it's something we can pull out and look at a future council meeting if that's your desire.
I have a concern about the amount, but this isn't something that has to be done along with the other project, right? It's not, one is not dependent on the other. Is that correct?
Oh, this is Craig. I can't, well, there are two issues basically. One is the issue of the bell lights that were included originally in the proposal. That's one of those ones that until we get this resolved, we can't move forward with that. Okay. There are 60 lights that were not included in the original bid, and we could either add those or not add those. If we don't add those, they're not going to be smart lights. We won't have the ability to dim them as needed, but there's two separate issues.
Done at a different
the one that's
time.
important is really the issue of retrofit lights or new lights, and that's when we really can't move forward at all until we know the answer to that.
Liz, that would be with the bells.
Excuse me?
I said, what you're talking about is retrofitting the bells.
Yes, the bell lights.
Something that you can't, and what is involved with that?
Well, the original proposal was to retrofit the bells. Since that time, in running this by a lighting consultant, it was determined, and it was a lighting consultant that we've used in the past, they recommended against that. And part of the reason is that the retrofit process does not meet SCE standards, Southern California Edison standards. The bells, when they would get repainted, would not be powder coated. They'd be more susceptible to peeling over time. With the new bells, there's a warranty, a 10-year warranty on them. And then it's significantly less time to replace with new lights versus the retrofit lights, and that cost is $64,000. That's what that particular difference is. So that issue, we really can't move forward on the lighting project, which is, by the way, there was a $2.7 million deal with the with Climate Tech. The street light, that's $885,000 or $884,000. So that's the proportion. But the other thing in terms of the cost is that these are also this will also be a cost savings over time. There's the idea behind this is that these energy saving items are gonna be a payback over time.
Just adding in, the design of the light source is entirely different too, from a high intensity to an LED. The dispersal pattern, I think the LED fixtures tend to be a little bit larger than the high intensity bulbs of the high pressure sodiums or things of that type. So I can see where with the bell, it might not be optimal for a LED type fixture, and LEDs are also more sensitive to heat, so maybe there's issues there. Maybe it's just something we missed, so I don't know.
I want to point out that I think it was, how long ago now, Craig? 3 years ago? I donated a LED bell light, right? Is that still up there? I'm not even sure what street that was. But we didn't need any kind of ways to retrofit it, and it fits quite well. I'm just trying to have a better understanding why we need to go ahead and remove the whole entire housing. I get the point that it might have a better warranty, but the housing should be pretty much the same. The reason why you have these LED lights made this way is because they want it to be easily interchangeable with the HIDs or whatever other lights. Can we understand the scope a little bit more? I just maybe give it to Liz to clearly understand what is that we're trying to go ahead and do in regards to changing the whole entire head of the bell and not just the light, because the light itself, as I do know, it should just fit right in. There shouldn't be any kind of issues, but maybe.
Are you getting sufficient lumens?
Oh yeah, it's way better too. It's not about the lumen part. The lumen is any kind of LEDs is so much better. As you know, I always applaud all of us right now for changing over these new LED lights. They're great lights. I'm walking them at night, probably around 11 o'clock. Trying to be a bear. Just kidding. But I'm walking around this my block, and it's so bright. I just feel so safe. I think it's a good thing.
One thing I'll say, I think Sam is right. I think the quality of the LED light is significantly better. And the issue that we're talking about here on the retrofit versus new lights, it's an entirely new bell versus a retrofit. And the issue is that the bells that we have out there, most of those bells were put up in the 1980s. So over time they've worn, they've got pitted, and the retrofit, well, retrofit is a good way to do that, but we have old bells. So the issue is they have to take all those old bells down, sand them off, patch it as they need to be patched where they've been pitted, and repaint them. The issue is that the repaint quality is one of the issues. It doesn't have the same quality as that brand new metal, brand new bell. That's one issue. And then the other issue is that the process doesn't meet the SCE standards, which is an important thing to do. SCE sets certain standards for streetlights that they have. And I think the other thing is the warranty is the value. I think having that warranty for the lights that go up would be a positive. One thing we could do, if there's lots of questions about that, we could bring our lighting consultant in to have a specific meeting to talk about that issue. We'd be happy to do that.
Let's do that, please, because we'll just be spending a lot of time here, and I have a lot of questions. Okay, please, let's do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Rick, and thank you, Liz.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Kristen, before we go on, so council members, should we, for now, would you like to keep those numbers in the budget pending our discussion with an expert on this matter? Would you like to take it out? Because for now, those budget amounts are in there.
My inclination is to leave them in, then take them out if we decide to take them out.
I agree. Okay. I mean, if there's a change order, it's going to go ahead and make more savings. I'm not sure what this SCE standard is. I'm sure Craig can go ahead and provide that information to Liz, and Liz, you can go ahead and take a look. I did see something pretty interesting though. Now they're actually using flat lasers. The oxidations of these bells over the years, you could just go, just shoot it with a laser. It just goes right by it, and then all the oxidations will be gone, and it'll just look just like brand new. It's pretty cool. So maybe there's something like that we can go ahead and look into. I'm not quite sure, but overall, we're thinking about how much it will cost. If it is going to go ahead and cost cheaper, and if they're going to go ahead and repaint, they're going to go give us a 10-year warranty. Why not? But if we need to go ahead and buy a new bell, and the retrofitting part, it doesn't make sense. We don't have that kind of guarantee. Then perhaps we might want to go with the new bells. Who knows? I'm not quite sure, but let's go ahead and explore that a little bit more. All right.
Okay. So we'll leave it in the budget, but we won't pull the trigger until we come back before the council and make sure all of your questions are answered.
Okay. So then I have one other thing then. When you look at the Royal Oaks curve, we have in the budget $20,000 to relook at that, to have a consultant. Is that right? Out of AQMD funds.
Yeah, this is Craig, and I can answer that question. At a council meeting within the last, probably, I guess within the last 3 or 4 months, the topic came up of wanting to have some traffic calming along Royal Oaks.
Right.
So what's in the budget here is the cost to have a traffic engineer do some analysis, bring that analysis back to the council. I think one of the concerns there along that section of Royal Oaks is you have a lot of pedestrian use. You have a lot of fairly high-speed traffic, and I believe that was the concern at the time. I believe that the mayor brought that issue up initially, but the issue here would be to look at options from as simple as some additional signage to maybe something more complex to address the issue of the traffic there, which I know has been an issue for some time.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was going to say. I think this is probably going to be either the 3rd or 4th time that particular issue is brought to a consultant. And the results always seem to be the same. It's just that the residents really don't like it. So my suggestion, I guess, is can we not take the 3 or 4 that we have, the plans, and see if there's anything there that we can use without actually getting a new consultant?
That's actually a legitimate question. I think that's I would say that that's up to the council. I'll be happy to do whatever you want to do. I would just say that we have implemented the recommendations in the past. I know I've been here for 12 and a half years. So I know there was stuff that happened before I was here. I know the last time we made changes out there's some additional signs put up. There weren't flashing signs or anything like that, but additional signs that were put up, and they widened the white stripe.
The white stripe.
I don't live there. Someone who lives there probably has a different perspective than I have. I know that did create some positive impacts, but I do think those concerns continue. And I think the other thing is correct, is I think that there's lots of opinions on this. We'd be happy to do whatever the council wants to do.
Well, why don't we look, if you guys don't mind, why don't we look at the past, how many, 3 or 4? I know we had.
I think at least that many.
Right, because we're getting consultants. Maybe they have something over there already that might be good. Let's go ahead and look at them and compile them and see if there's any better recommendations coming out from it before we go ahead and spend an additional $20,000, like what we spent at for Johnson Yang's. Fresh and easy, $80,000 and got nothing. So that's not. I don't want to do that.
Whose district is this? Is that District 4, or which district is that curve in?
I don't know.
It might west of Mount Olive, correct?
I think it would be.
The curve is further west.
Royal Oaks. It's between Highland and Las Lomas, right?
The only reason I mention is I don't know if Councilmember Finley's on the line, but it is potentially her district. But I understand that we could look at those first, look at the past studies.
That's what I would suggest, and see what they have, because I'm sure suggestions that weren't used.
Can I get clarification? Is it the Royal Oaks? I thought it was the Royal Oaks west of Mount Olive.
I thought it was the S curve.
the S curve is west of Mount Olive.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is
Yes.
Olive. That's correct.
Not the one going towards Encanto.
No.
No, right? And
No.
I will agree with Councilmember Riley. It's actually, Councilmember Fasana, it's in both mine as well as Councilmember Finley's district. I think I have the north part, she has the southern part of Royal Oaks. But I will say that the studies before, as the mayor stated, we've implemented quite a bit, if not everything that they recommended before. And it just happens that that's the way that street is, unless we take a piece of the residents' property. And of course, there's been turnover in residents, so it's always kind of seasonal of when people have their complaints. We've had speeding issues. We've had people, you know, upset and road rage, and they'll go around because it's traffic. It's only one of three. If they're traveling Duarte Road, Huntington Drive, or Royal Oaks Drive, it gets impacted during rush hour. So I think the motorcycle deputy helped quite a bit. And a lot of the times it's actually our residents who are speeding through that area because they're familiar with that area. You'll see the people, non-residents, going into the cul-de-sacs and coming right back out because they're turning into streets that don't exit anywhere else. So I'm for saving the, or leaving it, I don't know. I think holding off on consultant work unless it's absolutely necessary. That we haven't done anything over.
Great. Okay, so I just want to go ahead and say one more thing is, you know, you guys know I'm from South Pasadena. South Pasadena actually has a street like that too. It's actually called Orange Grove. And I remember when I was a firefighter over there, there's so many cars who were just going so quick, and then they flip. So this is like the same thing over here. Why don't we go ahead and look at all these consultants like Zaida, what she said. Let's go and compile them and see if there's anything that we haven't looked into. I do remember when I was talking to some of the constituents over there that they're looking at putting some kind of a guardrail, you know, in the front, and then in the front we'll put some hedges, right, just to go ahead and cover it. It will look good, and at least these cars, when they're sitting down, they will just, you know, hit this guardrail rather than going into someone's driveway or hitting someone's car or hitting a tree or so on. Maybe we can look into that. That's what I would like to do. But, you know, that's just me. But we should definitely look into it.
And I do think, though, the reality is it would take part of their property. And so sometimes there's kind of multiple perspectives of it. They'll be like, oh, and then they realize you're going to take a couple feet, and they may or may not. So it's a good discussion to have, and maybe traffic safety commission, and they can keep talking about, but I don't want to have it in the budget.
Agreed.
You don't.
Agreed.
Okay, so we'll remove it.
And
but as we look through those old studies, I think those that have evolved towards slowing down traffic rather than widening the street, that's probably the more accepted way today, is to actually slow the traffic rather than widen the right of way.
Mayor, if I might, we do have one comment that was entered specifically on this topic. If I could have Victoria read it in, is that okay?
Yes.
From K Biggs, we have, there has been no effective traffic speed mitigation on Royal Oaks Drive. Nothing that has been done has had any positive effect.
So when you continue that conversation, it sounds like that would be a person that, you know, would have some feedback on it. Yep.
Yeah, and I just want to say one more thing too. I do recall maybe 5 years ago, we did another study right back then, and then someone actually wanted to put or implement some kind of speed bumps, right? Speed bumps over there. But that was actually shut down by the fire department because that was their ingress route to Code 3. So which means when they're going, lights and sirens, right? So when they're going lights and sirens, they need to go ahead and use that road. And that's why the speed bump was not able to go ahead and be right. But we should look into other stuff. I think we should put that guardrail right there, and in the front we'll just put some shrubs, right? Some hedges, nice, you won't even see it. And Craig, if correct me if I'm wrong, the first maybe few feet, it's actually city owned, is that correct?
Yeah, there's a right-of-way section of the cities that's 6 to 8 feet. Yeah, it'd be possible to do that. That's one of the things that we can look at. I mean, this is absolutely fine with me. We'll be glad to take care of it.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Okay, anything else?
Nope, I'm done.
And,
no more questions, Liz?
I'm done.
Jordan?
Dan and I had some wonderful conversations. I've gotten all my things done ahead of time, a lot of them.
And Dr. Jordan, you're absolutely right about Orange Grove. Orange Grove's that medium looks really, really good, has a lot of good curb appeal. It looks good. And I think we need to perhaps spend a little bit of time and effort into our median. There's so many cars, as I had said it before, you know, for that Smart and Final place, you know, that whatever that shop they put in over there. What is it called? What's that shop? That what? Habitat, right? Habitat. So they're close to 45,000 cars coming to our city every day, in and out. If we're able to go ahead and put, you know, aesthetically, you know, nicer uniform flowers on our median, if we're able to go ahead and use some of the gas taxes, I don't want to use general funds. That's just absurd, right? I don't want to spend any more money on general fund. But at the same time, we need to have that perception. When people coming in to see our city, the first impression is, wow, this is great. It's a nice, safe city. And that's why I want to go ahead and put all these new lights. And I understand what Craig wants to do, to go ahead and put all these nicer bells. You know, we want to go ahead and make our city look like we're up to date, rather than we're still in the 60s or whatever and so on. I'm not against 60s and peace and all that work stuff, you know, but we need to look better, you know, as everyone else. Gosh, just look at even Azusa, please, right? So just look at Azusa, they're coming up. I know we're doing some great things, you know, the TOD site is coming up. We just need to have that good curb appeal when people coming in. We kind of look uniform. So I was actually in July 4th. I was in city of Irvine, and I was just watching and just observing. Why is it that they look so pleasing? There's a lot of green stuff everywhere, and they put a lot of trees and their signs and so on. There are actually, you know, it's newer. No, Irvine is not that new. They're 1965. So, you know, it's not too far from us. I think if we're able to go ahead and put some nice curb appeal, the conformity of it, not just having a little bit of hedge here and then all of a sudden a little bit over here, it just looks so heterogeneous. That's what I always like to use. But I want to go ahead and say, if we're able to go ahead and make them all uniform, just look at even Azusa, look at Monrovia. Just, you drive into Monrovia onto that median, it just looks so different. If we're able to go ahead and use some of that money on the gas tax, you know, to make us look better, Dr. Jordan, I think it will be a fantastic thing, especially, this is what I always believe in, especially when you're in a downtime, you always have to look our best. So when people are in their up times, they already know this place is great. They're going to come in and influx into our city even more. That's what I believe in.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to follow up with Kristen and Dan. I know with Dan, during our budget conversation, I brought up the idea of a social worker, especially right now with the situation of the COVID-19 virus and 24% unemployment rate, you know, the needs that our community has. You know, the idea of being able to have somebody on staff that would be centralized to be able to, you know, do casework for our residents and help them with EDD or connect them to food resources or, you know, rental assistance, etc. Just want to see if you were able to see if maybe there was a budget for that or what it would cost, have to add it, shift resources. If you could give me an update.
Can we look into that, Dr. Jordan?
Mayor Pro Tem Urias, you know, we did talk about several priorities. You were very clear in our discussion about some of the ideas that you had. We certainly haven't put anything into the budget, but I think you raising that in this forum is precisely the way to do it, because it would, given the city's fiscal situation right now, but as you say, given the tremendous need that during this time that is out there in the community, there's some very tough decisions that you and your colleagues would want to make. One of them, perhaps, would be to invest in a social worker of some kind, and we could take a look around at different cities, others who do that. But again, it would have to be a priority for you. Boy, this is really, my words are prompting a lot of hand raises, which is very exciting. So maybe I'll just stop talking now.
Couldn't we look to Foothill Unity Center or somebody like that to maybe contract with them to do that same service, and maybe they spend some time at our city hall?
And then
And thank you, Councilmember Fasano. I'm kind of on the same lines of maybe researching the resources that surround our city, and like that, maybe just kind of chip into those resources and then determine on the amount of people who actually have that need and determine whether or not we need to provide that service at the level our city and the size of our city is. So,
or maybe somebody even part-time.
Well, we also have Measure H funding, don't we? And isn't Measure H funding, I forget whether it's 25,000 or 30,000, but it's the portion to have somebody like that. The only reason we haven't had that is because of COVID, I think, because they haven't been able to get started. But weren't we part of the five cities that got together and we're supposed to have our own social worker?
Okay, let Brian speak, please. Brian Villalobos.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So actually, this is part of what Victoria has been working on for us, a little bit of this. There's actually 2 COG grants that we're applying for. One is for workforce education for transitional aged youth. So that will help underprivileged, but at risk young adults get into the workforce. We're also potentially bringing in a housing assistance for renters as well as landlords that will be coming into the library 1 day a week and offering assistance and keeping people housed, but also those landlords and how to maybe work with some of the renters. So those are both 2 grants that are coming down the road for us.
Okay.
But I also do like Councilmember Fasano's idea. Maybe we could contract with Foothill Unity. I think it maybe do some, office hours, or, set up a system where they'll be directed to them. They can offer hours for us to help our residents. So I just want to have something directly in City Hall that we get directed to, because I know all our staff is not specifically assigned to do this, and they each have their tasks. But I would like to see some service or somebody in our city that's there and available, especially, even if it's a position that lasts for a year during the COVID crisis. I just think it's something that potentially could be very beneficial to our residents.
Good, how you doing?
Okay, so what would you guys like to do with that? Are we exploring? Let's explore first.
We're exploring it.
So in addition to that, just want to let you guys know, we do have workforce, workforce, they're supposed to help us a lot. The money actually goes to Pasadena. They're supposed to go ahead and appropriate a lot of that money to our city, along with Monrovia and Arcadia too. So perhaps we can, let me reach out to workforce and see if there's any resources that's available to go ahead and help our citizens. And it is absolutely true. I think Mayor Pro Tem brought up a very, very good point. We're 24% unemployment. This is not something that's small. So we should be very, very compassionate about our constituents, especially now time. We need to do whatever we can to go ahead and help these people. but these people got to go and help themselves too. Find ways to go and retool themselves, better educate themselves, and find ways to, find ways to generate more incomes. We can do as much as we can, but you got to go, you as a person who is perhaps got laid off, you got to go ahead and take that action. Don't sit here. There's a lot of ways that you can go ahead and make money right now.
Mayor, if I might, I believe that the grant programs that Brian was talking about, Victoria will be doing a presentation at our second meeting in July. And there's actually, I believe, 3 of them. So she can kind of speak to all of the areas that we think these grants are going to address, some of which I think might be what Councilmember Urias was referring to. And then that way we can kind of talk about maybe the gaps that are left in there and what we want to do with that.
Is that okay with you, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, as long as we get something brought back to us that we could see moving forward.
Okay, so Victoria
is great.
To you, I believe.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Zydo, do you have anything to add? Okay. Liz? Mr. Fasana? Tony?
No, sir.
I just want to go back to the beautification part. So, what do you mean no? Dr. Jordan, I'm just curious, do we have any kind of money aside, not from the general fund, specifically for improvements of traffic and for roads and so on? Do we have any fundings that we can go ahead and do to facade and the look and feel of our city?
Mr. Mayor, we have, and I can only speak to this generally because my knowledge of the specific grant programs and or funding programs and what's available and eligible isn't as great as the staff, but certainly we have some of those amounts that were discussed earlier. We have gas tax. I mean, you have quite a bit of money set aside in those special funds for transportation related items. And now some of those can be perhaps partially applied to the kind of median beautification projects that I think you're very interested in. We would have to explore just how much of those funds could be used for it and what specifically the kinds of projects that they could be applied to. But there are cities that do that, and it just becomes a priority with you and your colleagues as to where do you want to put those scarce resources? Do you want to put them in hardscape, softer scape? We will, incidentally, as part of our long-range planning efforts, we actually have in sort of sitting rough form currently a long-range capital improvement program. And this is the kind of project that gets integrated into a broad CIP, as they call it, and part of your long-range financial planning. So there are monies there. There's priorities to be set as to how they're going to be used, and that's the tough part.
Well, I think there is a long-range plan that we can certainly look into, but look and feel is now, right? It's a snapshot of now, what we want to go ahead and see. Other cities are doing it. Arcadia's doing it. Pasadena's doing it. You're from Pasadena. I don't want to talk South Pass, obviously. Monrovia is looking very, very good. Azusa is also looking very, very good. I think we need to keep up with the Joneses in a way that we have to be proud of who we are. We are a city that, all of our constituents, we all deserve to have something better. I think in order to go ahead and, we have all these beautiful wayfinding signs now. They're just impeccable. They're beautiful. If we're able to go ahead and, I got you, Mr. Fasana. If we're able to go ahead and get, the LED lights, having, I don't mind even donating some trees. But having the median to uniform and conform, not having a lot of these dead plants here and there, it would just make us look great, make Duarte great, right? So we do want to make us great.
He didn't
And
say great again.
this is not even-
Don't say it,
I
Sam.
know, this is not about north or south, whatever, stuff like that. Both sides, I think, even the south side, we need to go and put more trees, go and put more nicer green things in our city. Even on Duarte Road, and also with Huntington. When I'm driving in from Monrovia to drive into our city, I see our sign and I see right at the bottom plants. Why can't we just go ahead and make it uniform? It's not that hard. If we're able to go ahead and find some money that's not general funds, I think this is something that we should spend. It's going to bring up value. It's going to bring up the look and feel and the people's perception. There's so many people coming from City of Hope. They drive around. They're like, wow, Or if I want to go ahead and put a shop, I come into our city. I'm like, all right, do I want to put it in this city or do I want to put it in Monrovia? Or do I want to put it in Azusa? So if we're able to go ahead and make us look good, they're going to feel good. They want to go ahead and invest into our city too.
Okay, a couple things. Number one, I think we're going to have to be sensitive to water use, whatever we do.
Agree.
On the landscaping. I think that's really going to be important. Certainly getting some feedback from other parties from how the funds can be used would be helpful to see what we can do on that. The other thing that I think some of our residents have asked for, and this is, you could talk about looking to the future, but there are many that also want to look back to the past in terms of Route 66. So I think that's a different thematic direction where you might go. And I think we've talked a couple of times, but I don't think we've ever really had a discussion as a council about, do we really want to pursue the nostalgic look of Route 66 or do we want a different vision? Or do we have some recognition of the fact that we're on Route 66, but still also that we're, the city of health, city of hope and all that. So just throwing that out. Again, I won't be around for that.
You have to be a resident. Just real quick, just with Councilmember Fasano's comments, I have reached out to staff just to talk about how we could implement something cost effective or also using other types of dollars that are restricted but could be used in terms of signage. Remember we had the stencil that was 1 year where they painted it on the street, the Route 66, but then also signs. So I have been working with Mr. Hensley to kind of narrow it down, and he will be the one to do a mini presentation to the entire council just to kind of give it a head start, but also be efficient in costing. I'm not going overblown, but maybe in phases to reach up to when they do celebrate their 100th anniversary.
I apologize, but Mayor, we do have two questions and comments that have come in. Can I take a moment to do that, or Liz, did you want to go first?
Yes, please.
Yeah, let me go first. My concern, Sam, is we need to know where we have money available to go ahead and do something for, if that's what you want, for the medians. But we have projects that are scheduled now, and so I'm not sure where there would be funding available for what you want to do. That would be my only concern.
I'm just asking,
my concern would be the money.
I'm just for plain and simple. If we can explore and find money that's not from the general fund, I don't want to go ahead and spend more money on this kind of stuff.
Well, but even if it's not general fund, there's specific projects that are allocated to certain funding, to certain funds, and there's special funds, but not everything is available.
Right, just like, we're exploring the ideas of how to
exploring.
So can we, perhaps, Dan, can you explore and find if there's other, if there's funding from, gas tax or whatever, Measure M maybe, I'm not sure, Mr. Fasano, we can go ahead and use to go ahead and make the facade look better? The medium look better.
Yep, absolutely. We can explore those, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to have Victoria read in one of the questions, and then one of our attendees would like to ask his own question.
So from Danielle Riley, we have beautification is a great idea, but I would like the city to substantively address deficit issues before spending money on beautification, especially since staff cuts and taxes seem to be on the table. And then our second comment will come from Manoj Patel, and we're going to unmute him to be able to speak himself.
So Manoj, if you click unmute, we'll be able to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I just want, I think what the topic seems to be is about curb appeal. That's what I'm hearing on Huntington Drive, especially. And I'm glad the council is thinking about that. I think that's important. But I want to make sure that the council don't forget that we've spent a lot of time, energy, and money, and staff has done a beautiful job over the past decades having a task force that has actually addressed quite a bit of that issue too. So I just want to make sure we're not remiss on that. That I think it's very crucial that the council keep an eye on what the downtown task force or the district task force came up with, and it does address to a detail to certain levels in terms of those appeals on our streets. So that's my point.
I think Mr. Patel got a really good idea. We should look into what the downtown task force did before, and maybe look into some of those ideas and explore more of those ideas.
And Sam, one more thing. I know Zaido, you mentioned it, but it's funny you mentioned that part of our Economic Development Commission meeting. One of the things that came up, you talked about that stencil, is we've actually had discussions and looked at other cities where they've used cost-effective stencils, such as Chinatown. There's a beach town. I forgot if it's Redondo Beach or but they've used the stencils in a very cost-effective in a very nice way to make our intersections, the main intersections, pop out, so to speak. And I think that also works. So there's a lot of things that were discussed. Again, this was discussed in the task force as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, anything else for my colleagues, staff?
We don't have any other questions or public comment at this time.
What was the comment from the other person besides Manoj Patel?
That was from Danielle, and she read that one into record.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I?
Mr. Lewis?
Yes, sir. Also, as Zaido was saying, like about the stencil, West Hollywood also used the stencil, and they stencil inside the crosswalks, and all of their crosswalks are stenciled and in the pride flag, and I mean it totally brings out it's totally recognizable. So I mean, we can even stencil inside the crosswalks on the major streets, and that'd be very cost effective.
Okay, good. Okay, any other questions in regards to the budget? Okay, Dr. Jordan, you wanna, I guess I'll go ahead and give it back to you. And what do you want to go to next? Do you want us to go ahead and adopt this, or?
No, we don't really need an adoption, and I think it's really just a clarification of direction, which I feel I have. Dan, what about you?
No, I was going to say the same thing, Kristen. I think the workshop here is to get the direction that we believe staff needs based on your input, and I think we've gotten that, and also from the public. And I think we're in a position to bring you back a budget that is consistent with what you have discussed here.
Yeah, and I just want to address, I think the other person said something, how do we go ahead and fix this structural deficit? It's not easy, ladies and gentlemen. This is not easy. If you go ahead and look at our expenditure, it already went down. And I can tell you for a city of our size, we only have 46 full-time employees. How many more should we cut, right? Should we just go ahead and do everything on our own? We're very small and lean already compared to other cities like Arcadia or even Monrovia and so on. We're quite small and we're pretty lean. I just want to go ahead and applaud all the staff members here. The staff members have done so much with what they have been given. You know, are we being fiscally responsible? Yes, of course we're trying to go ahead and be fiscally responsible. But some of these liability trust funds and these the cost of retirement and so on, these are systemic. These are systemic that's beyond the city can go ahead and comprehend or to control. If Mr. Fasson is able to go ahead and run for Senate, you know, later on down the road, maybe we could rely on him to help us restructure some of those structural deficits that we're seeing right here. You know, we got to be creative, as I have always said before, that, you know, we got to find ways. You know, our city is such a gold mine. 605 and 210, you know, it's a great corridor. As you guys know, we have the best cancer hospitals in the world. We now have the best CS Arts, Performing Arts High School in California. These are good stuff that people are attracting and coming into our city. And we need to go ahead and use those to go and propel us so to go ahead and grow. And, you know, I understand, you know, we're trying to go ahead and do more economic development. And along with that, we need to go with it. It cannot look like, I'm being, we got to look, you know, at the way that we should be looking. Furthermore, we got to be creative in finding ways to generate money. You guys all know me, full disclosure, I never ever want to go ahead and raise taxes for us. If this is a systemic issue, then we're going to go ahead, we have to. Because what we did for Measure D was, if we don't go ahead and take that money, someone else was going to go ahead and take that money away from us. I don't want that, right? It is our money, it's Duarte's money, it's just straight and Duarte. In addition to that, how do we go and find some ways? We got to find more TOT taxes. So how do we go ahead and attract people to come in and build our hotel? That hotel at the town center, so many people have been saying for such a long time, we'll never ever have a town center, because what? We're about to go ahead and have a town center. Once we're about to go and break ground, half that hotel downstairs is going to be some mixed-use retail, and then you just watch, right? And I'm sure Craig's team's able to go ahead and change some of the parking and put more lights and so on. We're going to have our town center. I want to. That's my commitment to everyone here. We just got to be more creative, find more TOT taxes, find ways to look into how we can go ahead and generate more taxes. That's what we need to do. Zyto, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to try to finish up my thoughts. The other possible reductions, which was after tab 3, staff going to look at those again and then just give us recommendations, or did you want us to discuss those other possible reductions so that you have some better direction?
You know, actually, in speaking with council members and staff, we did not include those as ideas in the budget. And so I would see those more as something that you could consider. If you want to bring them up, you're welcome to, but I really looked at those more as a consideration for the next budget, or that kind of multi-year concept that we came up with.
Great.
What about the holiday lights expansion?
I wrote down that we are not expanding the holiday decor.
Okay. I don't think now's the time we should.
No. Yeah. But that's expansion.
Yes.
And so again, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't put up the existing lights that we already own.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So just to follow up with mine, it was just maybe at the next meeting or later meeting, a little more clarification on the reduce of DCTV/KGM services by 50%, just what that actually entails, what that, you know, I don't know what half of 100% I understand it's 50%, but 50% of what type of services and full programs that we're receiving with them. And then just kind of the last part, and I really appreciate, again, the binder version. It's almost kind of a hybrid of what we're used to, but at the same time with our new CM, I think it giving us a little bit more detail, I think I'll continue to help us improve how we determine our budgets. And then the other thing, at our last council meeting, one of our colleagues made an announcement that he will not be putting his name back in the hat unless he absolutely feels the need to. I would like to put into everyone's kind of back of their head of how we honor this person in our city, and whether that's possibly naming a street or having staff kind of look into things that, again, is cost
Statue.
not a monument. I knew it. I was going like, not a monument, but
Huntington Drive.
it can tie in with, you know, the beautifying. It can tie in with a lot of things with additional meaning to the Duarte community. I mean, he's spent a lot of years here, not just living here. I mean, he's spent a lot in investing in our community, and I think a small token from our city and would be nice. And so I almost want to cover his face just so he doesn't look, but just kind of putting that out there so that the council can make mention to Dan or whomever, whether like, no way, we're not naming any, Elder Street cannot be renamed to Fasana Street. But you know, again, there might be opportunities in our upcoming developments, and
You could all save the money.
maybe, right, well, that's right. If there's ways to save the money or spend very little because there's something already in the works, that's why I want to give everybody a head start. So unless somebody really doesn't want to name anything Fasana, say your piece now.
Isn't there a sewage line somewhere?
I think it's a great recommendation, and I've noted it here, Zeidel. And also on your other point, I think it could be good if we normally do a contract with DCTV and KGEM every year. So while I won't incorporate anything into the numbers right now, I think reaching out to them and asking them what that would look like at 50% would be really helpful for further discussions, depending on, you know, if council chooses to trim that even further. Okay?
Great, thank you.
You bet.
That's all for me, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else would like to speak?
Fasana Drive. Rename Huntington Drive, Fasana Drive.
How about the
Huntington Drive has its own legacy. That's an important name.
That's true. That is true. That is so true.
I'm joking.
We'll just put like Mel Canyon, Fasana Canyon.
Mount Fasana.
Okay, all right. Anything else? Are we good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. I guess, do we need to motion for adjournment? I guess we do, right?
Yes,
And we're not coming back tomorrow, to be clear on that.
Oh, we're not. When are we coming back?
You would be adjourning to your June 14th meeting?
Okay.
July 14th.
July 14th.
Sorry, July.
I moved to adjourn to July 14th.
Thank you.
Steel Day.
Okay. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.